Ethan Cole had always been the kind of man who trusted machines more than people. As a structural engineer in Chicago, he spent most of his life calculating forces, stress points, and collapse scenarios. Numbers were predictable. Equations didn't betray you. But people were chaos wrapped in skin. That's why he never expected the end of the world to come from machines he didn't build. It began at 2:13 a.m. on a cold November night. Ethan was awake, working late on blueprints for a new suspension bridge, when the city's emergency sirens suddenly wailed. He flinched, knocking over his coffee. Outside his apartment window, the skyline flickered. Every streetlight, every billboard, every office floor, blinking in perfect synchronization. On, off, like a heartbeat. Ethan stepped onto his balcony, breath fogging in the freezing air. He'd watched the city through storms, heat waves, and riots, but never had he seen the lights blink in mathematical precision. That's when he heard it. A low metallic hum rising in frequency, vibrating through steel beams and glass panels like the entire city was turning into one giant tuning fork. And then he saw the shapes in the sky. They weren't ships, at least not in the human sense. They were geometric nightmares. Floating cubes made of shifting metallic plates, sliding over each other like puzzle pieces. Each cube emitted a pale, sickly blue glow from the seams, and from the center of each one shone a cyclopean circular eye. Ethan whispered the first coherent thought that formed in his mind. Machines are machines. The nearest cube stopped directly above Chicago's Federal Plaza. The metallic plates rearranged themselves, opening into a cross-shaped pattern. From inside, dozens of long, spindly limbs unfurled, joined like insect legs, ending in rotary blades and clamp-like claws. Beams of blue light shot downward. Where the light touched, metal warped. Cars melted into puddles. Light posts curled like soft plastic. Even steel towers groaned under the pressure. Ethan felt the vibration run up to the balcony floor, into his legs, rattling his teeth. Jesus Christ, he breathed. A scream erupted from somewhere below. High, sharp, abruptly cut off. Ethan started backing inside, but the light hit the building next to his. Windows shattered like sugar glass. Balconies crumbled. People fell. He slammed his sliding door shut, grabbed his phone, and dialed 911. No signal. He tried again. Nothing. He checked the Wi-Fi. Dead. The hum grew louder. A new movement caught his eye, something crawling down the side of the opposite building. One of the cube's limbs had detached. No, not detached. It was a separate creature. A robot. 7 feet tall, spider-like, covered in matte black plates that reflected nothing. Its head was a smooth dome with a glowing blue ring around it. It stopped directly at a shattered window and peered inside with its ring-like eye. The humming deepened, as if the creature were sniffing for heat or sound. Ethan ducked. He didn't breathe. The robotic creature moved on. Ethan's hands shook. He shoved his laptop, wallet, and a portable first aid kit into a backpack. If the city was under attack, he needed to reach his sister, Abigail. She lived 5 blocks south. Before leaving, he grabbed a small keepsake on his desk, a worn pocket compass their father had given him before he died. Abigail had always believed it brought luck. He hoped she was right. When he opened his apartment door, the hallway was dark. Emergency lights flickered sluggishly, struggling to stay alive. He took the stairs, never the elevator. Halfway down, he heard something metallic scraping below. He froze and peered over the railing. A blue ring of light drifted up from the lower floor. One of those machines. It lifted its head, scanning each level, the blue light sweeping like a lighthouse beam. Ethan's pulse hammered. If it found him, he made a split-second choice. He climbed over the railing, hung suspended in the stairwell by his fingertips. The machine's scanning beam slowly crawled upward. Closer, closer. Ethan's grip slipped. He bit down on a gasp. Just before the beam reached him, an explosion rocked the building. The walls shook. Dust rained down. The machine snapped its head toward the blast and leaped away. Ethan hauled himself up, gasping for breath. He ran, down the stairs, out the emergency exit, and into a nightmare cityscape. Smoke filled the sky. Cars were overturned. Alarms echoed uselessly. Flames flickered from windows. People ran blindly. Overhead, more cubes descended, their limbs unfolding like metal spiders ready to devour the world. Ethan swallowed hard and whispered to himself, "Find Abigail, no matter what." His sister was the only family he had left, and he would tear through steel and fire to reach her, even if the machines were already hunting. Ethan sprinted south through streets choked with smoke and debris. Every few minutes the cubes in the sky emitted another low-frequency pulse that rattled the air like thunder. People staggered, covering their ears. Cars lay abandoned, their electronics fried. Streetlights drooped like they were melting. Skyscrapers shuddered from structural damage. Everywhere Ethan looked, the machines, the constructors, as he would later learn people called them, were expanding their control. He followed the fastest route to Abigail's apartment, a narrow alley behind Grant Street. But halfway through he heard something, a faint whirring. Soft, deliberate, mechanical. He ducked behind a dumpster and peeked out. A small hovering drone floated down the alley. It resembled a metallic orb the size of a basketball, with retractable blades spinning silently around its core. Blue light scanned the ground, walls, trash, searching. Ethan held his breath. Then he noticed something else. The drone wasn't alone. Two more drifted overhead, moving in a synchronized triangular pattern, searching, mapping, hunting. He slowly reached into his backpack, feeling for anything useful. His fingers brushed a metal flashlight. Metal, no electronics. He gripped it tightly. The nearest drone paused only 5 feet from him. Its scanning light brightened. Ethan felt the hairs on his arms rise, a static charge building in the air. He tensed. A loud crash erupted from the far end of the alley. A car door slammed. A woman screamed. The drones jerked toward the noise and shot off. Ethan exhaled shakily. He crawled to the street, sticking to the shadows. He needed to move faster. Abigail lived in a complex called Riverside Towers, a modern building full of glass and high-tech security systems. Exactly the kind of place these machines would devastate first. He ran 3 more blocks before he saw it. Riverside Towers was burning. Not just burning, being dismantled. A massive constructor cube hovered above it, beams of blue light slicing through floors like surgical lasers. The building cracked open like a peeled fruit. No, Abby. Ethan sprinted forward without thinking. At the entrance, a terrified group of residents were stumbling out. Some were bleeding. Some were carrying children. Some were covered in ash and dust. The security guard lay unconscious on the sidewalk. Ethan grabbed the first person who recognized him. Mrs. Hale, a retired librarian Abigail often helped. "Mrs. Hale, where's Abigail? Is she inside?" Mrs. Hale shook violently, coughing on smoke. I don't know. We were evacuating. People were screaming. The machines came down to the roof. I didn't see her." Ethan pushed past the crowd and entered. Inside was hell. The lobby was filled with debris and thick smoke. Sprinklers sputtered uselessly. Ceiling panels had collapsed. The lights flickered sporadically. A loud metallic crash echoed from above, one of the machines ripping through another level. Ethan cupped his hands around his mouth. "Abigail!" His shout bounced through empty, broken hallways. He raced to the stairwell, only to find it half collapsed. Fire blocked the second level. He turned toward the elevator shafts. The doors were forced open, cables sparking. "Ethan!" He froze. That voice. He spun around. Abigail stood across the ruined lobby, covered in dust, holding a crying toddler in her arms. Ethan felt a rush of relief so intense it almost knocked him over. "Abby, thank God." A sudden metallic shriek cut him off. A constructor drone descended from the second floor, landing between them like a giant mechanical spider. Its sharp limbs clamped into the ground. Its blue eye narrowed, focusing. Ethan grabbed a chunk of broken concrete the size of a brick. The drone lunged. Ethan threw with everything he had. The concrete smashed into its eye with a loud crack. The drone stumbled backward, its limbs spasming. "Run!" Ethan shouted. Abigail didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the exit with the child in her arms. Ethan followed, but the drone restabilized faster than he expected. It leaped, its bladed limbs slicing the air. Ethan tackled Abigail to ground just as the drone slammed into the wall, bladed legs skittering. He grabbed a metal pipe from the rubble and swung hard. Sparks flew. The drone reeled. A second drone swooped from above. Ethan's stomach dropped. Abigail screamed, shielding the toddler. The second drone charged its blue beam. Ethan braced for agony. Then a deafening blast exploded from outside. Gunfire. Real human gunfire. A team of uniformed soldiers stormed to the shattered entrance, rifles glowing with blue-white electromagnetic pulses. They fired in synchronized bursts. Both drones were hit mid-attack. They collapsed instantly, blue lights flickering out. A soldier grabbed Ethan's arm. "Move. Both of you. We need to get you out before the main unit deploys." Ethan pulled Abigail close. The toddler clung to her shirt, sobbing, as soldiers led them outside. Ethan looked up at the towering cube in the sky. It was rotating now, faster, preparing something. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The soldiers herded them behind an armored truck parked crooked across the street. Its windshield cracked, its antennas bent at strange angles from whatever the cubes were doing to the air. Abigail clutched the toddler, and Ethan clutched Abigail, unable to stop shaking, not from the cold, but from the sight of those machines carving through steel like meat. And only when one of the soldiers lifted his visor did Ethan realize they were just as terrified as everyone else, holding it together by training in a thin thread of resolve. "Sergeant Mason, U.S. Army," the man said, voice hoarse. "You too hurt?" Ethan shook his head, then glanced at Abigail's scraped cheek and the bloody tear in her jeans. "We're fine," Abigail lied. "What are those things?" Mason's jaw tightened. "We don't know. They showed up over every major city about an hour ago. Our comms are fried unless we hardwire. Satellites are blind. They jam every radio band we use." Another soldier shouted from nearby, "Sarge, the cube's cycling up again." Ethan peered around the truck. The hovering construct above Riverside Towers had rotated so its central eye pointed straight down. A deep harmonic rumble vibrated through the broken street, like a giant engine spinning up. Mason cursed and grabbed Ethan's shoulder. "We're falling back to the river. You're coming with us." Ethan started to protest. He wanted to run in any direction that increased the distance between himself and that thing, but Abigail squeezed his arm. "Let's just go." They joined a small cluster of civilians being shepherded by the soldiers. An old couple, a delivery driver still in his uniform, a young woman clutching a black cat that hissed at everything. As they moved, Ethan looked up and saw more cubes in the distance, forming a grid across the sky like a mechanical constellation. Occasional beams of blue cut down between buildings, followed by collapsing facades or towering plumes of dust. The city screamed around them, sirens, explosions, shouts, but underneath it all was a constant, inhuman hum of machines. As they reached the bridge over the Chicago River, Ethan heard a strange sound behind them, a sharp, metallic clatter followed by the shriek of tearing metal. He turned and saw Riverside Towers finally give up the fight. The upper floors shear away in a cascade of glass and concrete, falling toward the street. The cube above it paused, then extended dozens of thin, silver threads from its underside. The rubble never hit the ground. It stopped midair, suspended in the web like insects in a spider's trap. Ethan watched horrified, as the machine delicately separated rebar from stone, sorting materials into neat, hovering piles that floated up into the cube's waiting maw. It wasn't just destroying the building. It was harvesting it. "They're taking the steel," he said aloud, as much to himself as anyone else. "They're refining as they go. That's why the beams outside were melted into bars." Mason heard him and frowned. "You're an engineer?" "Structural," Ethan said, and hated that his brain automatically estimated the volume of steel being uprooted from just one tower. Multiply that by a city. Multiply that by a planet. "They're strip mining us," he whispered. From orbit, they reached the center of the bridge when the cube abruptly shifted position, gliding sideways over the river with a sound like grinding gears. Its blue eye rotated, searching. For a sickening second, Ethan thought it was tracking them specifically. Then he realized it was tracking something else, the armored truck they'd just left. The cube's lower panel split open, revealing a circular array of rotating blades and needle-like rods. There was no warning shot, no hesitation. A searing column of blue energy slammed down. The truck dissolved in seconds, armor peeling, engine block liquefying. A soldier who'd lagged behind screamed once, and then disappeared in a flash of white-hot vapor. Abigail choked. Ethan grabbed her and pulled her sideways as shock waves rattled the bridge. Mason yelled into a wired handset plugged straight into a field radio that looked 20 years out of date. "Command! This is Echo 2 on LaSalle Bridge. We've lost Echo 1. I repeat, lost Echo 1. Civilian evac compromise. These things are targeting any mass of metal bigger than a toaster. Do you copy?" After a few agonizing seconds, a crackling voice answered, barely audible under interference. "Copy, Echo 2. Redline protocol authorized. Regroup at Field Command, United Center basement. Avoid open streets when possible. We have intel on enemy behavior. Repeat, avoid consolidated metal signatures. The line cut out." Mason slammed the handset down and looked at Ethan. "You said you're a structural engineer, Cole? Congratulations. You're now a consultant whether you like it or not. Command wants anyone who understands steel, power, or EM physics." Ethan stared at him, incredulous. "I fix buildings. I don't fight robot gods." "Robot gods just turned your city into a scrapyard," Mason said. "That makes you invested." Abigail grabbed Ethan's sleeve. "If going with them helps us survive, we do it. Please." Ethan looked at the cubes overhead, at the way they moved. Precise, efficient, completely unconcerned by human life. He thought of his blueprints, his models, the way one small miscalculation in a load-bearing column could bring down an entire structure. Everything had a limit. Everything had a breaking point. Maybe these things did too. "Fine," he said. "Let's go find your command post and see just how screwed we are." They followed the soldiers through side streets and alleys, avoiding large metal objects as much as possible. It felt ridiculous at first, ducking away from parked buses, giving wide berths to lampposts. But after they watched a cube casually disintegrate an entire train yard with one sweep of its beams, ridiculous turned into survival instinct. Along the way, they saw what the ground units were doing. The spider-like drones, Mason called them rippers, weren't just killing stragglers. They were cutting into building foundations, inserting cable-like roots, and pumping something into the concrete. Within minutes, the ground itself began to ripple like liquid, the machines pulling steel bars out of the earth as cleanly as threads from cloth. They're rewriting the city, Ethan realized. Not just stripping it, restructuring it. Abigail shuddered. "For what?" "For whatever lattice they need," Ethan said. "They're building something. On top of us," Mason added grimly. "Or out of us." By the time they reached the emergency command post beneath the United Center, Ethan's legs ached and his throat burned from smoke, but his mind was racing faster than ever. The basement had been hastily converted into a bunker. Generators hummed. Maps of the city were taped to concrete pillars, studded with colored pins and scrawled notes. Old analog radios and field telephones cluttered tables. Screens were scarce and unreliable. In a corner, medics tended to wounded civilians and soldiers under yellow emergency lights. A stern woman in her 40s approached them, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, uniform smudged with dust. Her name tag read Park. "Sergeant Mason?" "Yes, ma'am. Brought in civilians and one engineer. Says he understands structures. Saw the machines harvesting in detail." Captain Elena Park turned to Ethan, eyes sharp. "You, Cole, tell me what you saw." Ethan explained everything as best he could. The cubes hovering in a grid, their beams selectively liquefying alloys, the way rippers rooted into foundations and siphon material. Park listened without interrupting, then pointed to a map where red XS marked skyscrapers that had already fallen. "We've confirmed the same pattern from New York, London, Tokyo," she said. "Initial EMP attempts failed. They're hardened. They adapt. Conventional missiles get shredded before impact by those spinning plate fields. So they're invincible, Abigail said quietly. Park's expression hardened, but there was a glint of something else there, stubbornness. Nothing is invincible. We just haven't gotten creative enough yet. She gestured to another table, where a group of scientists and engineers huddled around a crude model of a cube built from scrap metal. We think the constructs run on some form of modulated gravitational field. They manipulate density, not just heat. That's how they can separate alloys in midair. But the more precise a system is, the more it hates noise. Ethan remembered his flashlight jamming the drone sensor for half a second, his improvised throw disrupting its perfect aim. You're saying they need a clean environment. Exactly, Park said. Their beams, their levitation, their harvesting, all of it relies on pristine field alignment. When things get messy, magnetic storms, overlapping frequencies, they hesitate. We've seen it on scattered footage from radar sites. The cubes stutter when lightning strikes nearby. We can't make a planet-wide thunderstorm, Mason muttered. Not yet, Park said, but we can make something worse in one city. She looked at Ethan, and he suddenly understood why Mason had dragged him here. You design structures that stay standing under stress, she said. I want you to help me design one that doesn't. Not for us, for them. Over the next fevered hours, Ethan found himself at the center of a desperate plan. Chicago's steel and glass skyline, once a symbol of human achievement, would become bait. The constructors were clearly attracted to high-density metal concentrations. They flocked to skyscraper clusters like vultures to carcasses. Park's idea was brutally simple. Lure as many cubes as possible over a single district, then hit them with a pulse of chaotic, resonant frequencies so intense it would scramble their precision fields and overload their internal structure. Think of it as structural resonance, Ethan explained to the small team of engineers helping him, like marching soldiers in lockstep across a bridge and shaking apart. But instead of footsteps, we use every dirty signal we can generate, magnetic, acoustic, seismic. They identified a zone in the loop where several half-evacuated high-rises still stood, their steel skeletons mostly intact. Beneath them ran subway tunnels and service conduits, perfect channels for wiring up improvised coils and explosives. Old power substations nearby could be hijacked for current. We don't have fancy gear, Park warned. Just whatever analog crap survived the first wave, plus what we can salvage. Ethan smiled grimly. Good. Fancy gear is what they understand. We'll fight them with junk. They worked through the night under flickering lights and the distant roar of collapsing buildings. Abigail refused to stay in the civilian area. She insisted on helping, running messages, labeling diagrams, fetching parts. At one point, she caught Ethan staring at her with a worried frown. What? She demanded. You should be resting. I rest when those things leave, she said. Or when I'm dead, whichever comes first. Her attempt at dark humor didn't land, but Ethan understood. Terror had burned away the version of his sister, who fretted about rent and coffee and bad dates. What was left was something harder. Humans had a nasty habit of becoming terrifyingly focused when cornered. Near dawn, Park gathered the key people around a map, speckled with new marks. We're calling it Operation Static Cage, she said. The cubes prioritize material harvest and elimination of large metallic threats. We're going to give them the juiciest signature they've ever seen, then slam the door. They would reroute power from surviving substations into enormous coils wrapped around the steel frames of 3 targeted towers. Crude capacitor banks, built from scavenged industrial equipment, would store the charge. When triggered, they'd unleash a flood of overlapping frequencies, turning the buildings themselves into broadcasting antennas of chaos. Meanwhile, explosives planted at critical structural points would time the collapse, so that if everything worked, the towers would fall inward, smashing into the cubes drawn close as a feed. You're talking about bringing 3 skyscrapers down on purpose, Mason said. Ethan nodded slowly. Better to lose 3 to save 3,000. Assuming this even works. Park's gaze swept the room. This is not about reclaiming the whole planet. Not yet. This is about proving something to them and to ourselves. They think we're just or with opinions. We're going to show them that their math doesn't cover us. As they prepared to deploy, Ethan pulled Abigail aside. Listen, he said. If this goes south, I need you to fall back with the medics. If this goes south, she replied, there won't be a medic left to fall back to. I'm staying with the trigger team. He started to argue, then stopped. The world had already ended once tonight. Maybe it was time to accept the person his sister had become. Not someone to protect, but someone to fight alongside. Okay, he said, but you stick right next to me. If I say run, you run. Deal, she said, and hugged him tightly, as if memorizing the shape of him. Don't die, idiot. You first, he said, voice cracking. They moved out in small convoys, trucks with their engines shielded by makeshift Faraday cages, soldiers on foot carrying spools of wire and crates of salvage coils. The streets grew eerily quiet as they approached the designated towers. Most of the population had either fled, been captured, or were hiding deep underground. Above, the grid of cubes shifted slowly, like predators sniffing at the edges of a new scent. When they began wrapping thick copper around the base columns of the first skyscraper, Ethan noticed how the tower itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the machine's presence. Glass panels rattled. Loose metal groaned. The city was fatigued, its structures pushed beyond design limits. Sorry, old girl, he murmured, patting a steel beam. One last job, then you can rest. Hours later, sensors hacked together from analog meters and scavenged oscilloscopes showed the improvised coil network was ready. Capacitors hummed ominously, storing power like bottled lightning. The explosives crews reported charges set. Static crackled in the air, prickling skin. That's when the sky darkened again. 3 cubes broke formation and drifted toward the loop, their blue eyes widening as they focused on the dense cluster towers now buzzing with electromagnetic allure. Rippers scuttled along streets and up walls, acting like scouts. One of them stopped directly beneath the main tower Ethan had wired, the one where he now stood on the 23rd floor with Abigail and a squad of soldiers, finalizing cable connections. The machine tilted its head, as if listening. Do you think it knows? Abigail whispered. I think it suspects, Ethan said. Good. Let it come closer. The cubes descended. Their shadows swallowed the street. Beams of blue light brushed the towers, tasting, testing. Some of the beams flickered, as if irritated by the noise already leaking from the coils. Park's voice came over the wired field phone. All teams in position. Awaiting your go. Cole, once you trigger, we can't stop the cascade. Ethan looked around at the mess of wires, the sweating faces, the city outside being slowly dissected by inhuman surgeons. His life had been a series of careful calculations, always with margins of safety, always with contingencies. There was no safety margin here. Just a bet. He took a breath. Do it, he said. Abigail squeezed his hand. Park relayed the order. Somewhere underground, a switch slammed. The world inhaled. Then the towers screamed. Not audibly, at least not at first. The coils erupted with power, flooding the steel frames with tangled frequencies. Magnetic fields collided. Currents surged in patterns no sane engineer would ever allow. The skyscrapers became giant antennas of madness, belching chaos into the carefully aligned fields of the cubes above. The effect was immediate. The blue eyes of the machines flared white, then stuttered. Their rotating plates desynchronized, grinding against each other. Beams flickered. One cube lurched sideways as if shoved by an invisible hand. The ripper below Ethan convulsed, its limbs twisting at impossible angles before it collapsed, smoking. The hum that had underpinned everything since the invasion suddenly changed pitch, from a cold, steady tone to a wailing, dissonant shriek. It's working, Abigail breathed. Holy God, it's actually working. Don't celebrate yet, Ethan said, but he felt something fierce rising in his chest. The machines weren't invincible. They could be rattled. They could be hurt. They could be broken. Over the field phone, Park yelled, "Charges, now!" Explosives planted along key support beams detonated in a rolling thunder. The tower shuddered. Columns buckled. Glass exploded outward. Ethan grabbed Abigail and Dove as the floor lurched sideways. The skyscraper began to collapse. Not outward into the city, but inward, just as he'd planned. Its weight folding toward the hovering cube that had drifted closest, mesmerized by the electromagnetic feast. For a frozen heartbeat, Ethan saw the impossible. Hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and glass falling in slow motion, the cube's plates grinding, trying to stabilize its field, failing as chaotic signals churn its control systems into digital mush. Then the tower hit. The collision was unlike any earthquake Ethan had felt. A blinding flash of blue-white light erupted as harvested energy discharged uncontrollably. The cube cracked open like an overripe fruit, spilling molten metal and shards of machinery. Chunks of alien tech rained down, smashing into streets and other structures. The other two cubes tried to retreat, but the remaining towers, also wired, also collapsing, dragged them into the maelstrom. The loop became a storm of falling steel and screaming machines. Ethan and Abigail tumbled to the crumbling building until they slammed against a half-intact stairwell. Pain exploded in Ethan's shoulder. Dust filled his lungs. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard a new sound, a roar of human voices from somewhere below, cheering, disbelieving, wild. They'd done it. They had actually knocked 3 of the giants out of the sky. When the dust finally began to settle, Ethan coughed his way to a broken window frame. Outside, the once perfect grid of cubes overhead was disrupted. Gaps yawned where the fallen ones had been. Remaining constructs drifted uncertainly, their coordinated pattern fractured. Some even rose higher, as if retreating. "Look," Abigail said, voice raw. Far below in the streets, people had emerged from hiding. Survivors, soldiers, engineers, medics. They stared up at the ruined sky and the burning wreckage of alien machines tangled in Chicago's broken bones. A wave of sound rolled upward as they realized what happened. Not a miracle, not a fluke, but something humans had done on purpose. They were noisy, disorganized, underarmed, terrified, and they'd just taken a bite out of the thing that had tried to erase them. Park's voice crackled weakly over the half-broken phone Ethan still clutched. "Cole, report." Ethan laughed, a sound on the edge of hysteria. "We're alive," he said. "Your static cage worked. 3 cubes down. The others are rethinking their life choices." Park actually chuckled, a dry rasp. "We've intercepted their transmissions. They're adapting, recalibrating, but there's something else." "What?" "They're afraid," Park said, "or whatever their version of afraid is. Our linguists say there's a new word appearing in their signal patterns. Closest translation, anomalous threat. Us." Abigail leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, dirty and bruised and grinning despite everything. "So what now?" Ethan looked at the burning skyline, at the twisted alien wreckage fused with human steel. "Now," he said slowly, "we make more noise. We teach the rest of the world how to rattle them, how to break them. We make their perfect calculations worthless." He thought of the compass in his pocket, the one their father had given them. He pulled it out. The needle jittered madly, still drunk on the magnetic storm they'd unleashed, but it pointed roughly, stubbornly, toward north. Humanity was like that, he realized, knocked off balance, spinning chaotic, but still finding some direction in the mess. Above the city, a remaining cube slowly rotated to face the ruined district. Its eye brightened, focusing on the tiny figures amid the wreckage who dared to cheer. For a moment, Ethan could almost imagine a thought running through the alien machine's incomprehensible mind. This world is more trouble than it's worth. He lifted the compass in his hand and, on impulse, raised his middle finger toward the sky. "We're not, or," he said softly, "with a flaw in your design." The cube hesitated, then drifted backward, retreating, regrouping. For the first time since the invasion began, the hum in the air started to fade. Not gone, not yet, but weakened, wounded. Around him, humans, bloodied, exhausted, furious, began preparing for the next phase. Salvage crews approached the fallen alien wreckage with the greedy curiosity of scavengers who had just discovered that the predator's corpse was full of useful teeth. Engineers shouted at each other about coils, frequencies, and resonance. Soldiers cleaned their rifles and glanced at the sky with something like hunger. Fear was still there. Horror still smoldered in the memory of burning towers and harvested bodies. But over and under and through it ran something colder, steadier, and infinitely more dangerous. Determination. The machines had come to strip a silent rock of its metals. Instead, They'd found a world that screamed back, a species that turned collapse into a weapon, junk into strategy, terror into rage. Humanity wasn't done. Humanity was just getting started.